to understand whether there's peat bogs and how we restore the peat bogs, what insect life is actually living there, what fish, what species of birds, what animals, what kinds of trees, and to understand what the space would have looked like before it became a commercial forest, and try with the minimal sort of our own intervention to restore it to that. So of course we'll plant trees, so clearly that is human intervention, but try to do it in the sort of least managed way possible, so that we allow for the trees to regrow on their own, to regenerate on their own, and then the bird life and the insects and so on, they'll all return to that space and to provide that space for that.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Creating a Vegan World. Today I'm interviewing Emilia Leese. She's co-author of Think Like a Vegan, and she's into rewilding, where there's a lot of news in the media where people are not vegan, animal agriculture destroys environments such as rainforests, other types of environmental destruction. So this is like the ray of light where we'd be able to turn some of the destroyed environments back into wilderness that could house animals and be a better place for the earth. So I think I did a good job introducing that, but if you want, we'll go into more details during the interview. If you want to start off by introducing yourself in more detail and what you do.
So I'm Emmy, and I'm a lawyer, I'm an author, and now I'm a rewilder. And that all sort of fits together somehow. I live up in the Highlands of Scotland, and also in London, but I've been up here now for a bit. And our rewilding project is here in the Highlands as well, just south of Loch Ness. And rewilding, as you said, it's been in the news a lot. And sometimes people have a misunderstanding of what it is. So I'm delighted that you asked me to be on your show. And so thank you very much for that invitation. And hopefully we can talk about this and shed some light on what we're doing and inspire others.
Absolutely. And like I said during my other interviews, I like to focus on the bigger picture where you're working on your thing in one area of the world where other people might be inspired and play their individual role and do the same thing somewhere else. So I always like to strategize and do things like that. So the formulas to follow is like, before getting to rewilding as a solution, but what is the problem? What is the problem that you're solving?
Well, what rewilding does is takes, it helps environments to restore to their sort of original biodiversity. And that means restoring wildlife, restoring vegetation, and also restoring the community itself. So rewilding does not exclude people. We've, as a species on this planet, we've had a lot of interaction with our environment, and we've changed it tremendously. And in some instances, it's gotten to a point where the biodiversity and the environment itself is no longer, it's just so off balance and so off kilter that it's not really how it was meant to be, and it doesn't provide all that it could provide to all the species, animals and humans and plants and insects to thrive. And that's the problem that rewilding is trying to address. It's one of the tools that's trying to address. It's a tool in a wider toolbox of addressing climate change as well.
Great. And the way I just interpret it is pretty much part of the environment gets destroyed in some sense, and you go back in and start rebuilding it, bring it back to the natural state. So can you tell us one specific example of what you're doing in your local area in terms of rewilding?
Yeah. So what we're doing, I'll describe the site and then tell you about what we're doing. The site is 100 acres south of Loch Ness, and it was a small commercial forest up until a few years ago when we bought it. And it used to have a variety of different species that are endemic to this area, like Scots pines, rowan and oak and so forth. Now it has the fast growing timber like pines, Sitka spruce, and so forth. And what we are doing is looking at ways that we can reforest, what species of plants and trees we need to have back on site. And we're looking to understand what actually is on the site and what would have been on the site. So we are working with a couple of different partners, AECOM, which is a big infrastructure company, and Lifescape Project, which is a nonprofit organization that works in this space, and also the University of Cumbria, to understand whether there's peat bogs and how we restore the peat bogs, what insect life is actually living there, what fish, what species of birds, what animals, what kinds of trees, and to understand what the space would have looked like before it became a commercial forest, and try with the minimal sort of our own intervention to restore it to that. So of course we'll plant trees, so clearly that is human intervention, but try to do it in the sort of least managed way possible, so that we allow for the trees to regrow on their own, to regenerate on their own, and then the bird life and the insects and so on, they'll all return to that space and to provide that space for that. And in that, we also include a community component and an artistic component. We like to have artists stay on site so that they can create while they are surrounded by nature. And in terms of community, we will be engaging with the community to see what sort of things that they're looking for.
That's amazing. And for people watching this, like around the world who might be interested in this type of thing, is there a specific criteria of like the places you choose to do these projects where something has to be perfect, or can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, of course. That's a good question. Rewilding can happen anywhere. Sure, you know, we're up here in a particular place, and but you can do it from your windowsill to your garden to huge, vast sites in a variety of different places. I mean, there are some incredible projects in Chile. There are other incredible projects up here in Scotland and England, and elsewhere in Europe and in the US, so all over. But I don't want people to think that it's only something that has to be done on a large scale. Yes, of course, scale is extremely important because of the sort of large scale problems that we're facing. But everybody can do a bit of rewilding in their own space. If you have a garden, no matter the size, you can think about, well, how might it look if it were a more natural space? So that would entail maybe cutting the grass less, or maybe not at all, if you are able to do that, especially in certain places. To think about, well, what is it that that birds might need and that insects might need, and provide that sort of thing. And there's also space to do it. I actually have a friend in London who has rewilded a corner of an allotment that was not really being used, and it wasn't a productive space. So what they've done is they've put a pond and plantings and so forth, so to give a space to insects, amphibians, and birds and so forth. And that's in a very, very urban environment of London. So there's a variety of things one can do. And if you're in an apartment and you have a windowsill, maybe you can plant some pots of plants or flowers and so forth. That might be beneficial to insects. So there's something everybody can do. And if you're not a green thumb person, completely fine. Just read up on it. And one of the places I would recommend people to go is to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN.org, and to read about rewilding from there, and then look into it, because some people may not even have the space on their windowsill, but there's still things that you can do to just see, oh, hey, what's this about? And that way, once you start looking into it, then you'll get inspired and may be able to see other projects and other people who are doing such things.
You made an amazing point where some people, they want to make a difference, but they try to start like really big and make a huge impact, where it's just one person doing one small thing could have huge ripple effects in the future. Where the reason I went vegan is a process, but someone posted a picture on Facebook of an animal for a fundraiser to help them get medical care. And because of that like lit up the compassion in my heart. I started to do marketing for a vegan business, started my own business, doing this YouTube channel, filming a documentary. And it was that one little thing that made a huge ripple effect and what I'm seeing with this, like all people doing their own piece of the puzzle, no matter how big or small, when it comes together, that's where the big change happens. So I'm really glad you said that about people who do it at home, don't have to take on huge projects.
Exactly. And we are just individuals, but together we can make a difference. But we do have to start with ourselves. And as you said, you never know where you're going to get that inspiration to do something or to learn about something. And that's just so important. So important.
Absolutely. And one of the organizations I've donated to, they plant trees in like a different part of the world. They have like their dedicated forest. And for like $7 a month, they plant like 20 trees or something. So is that an example of part of it, or is that a different type of thing?
No, that's certainly part of it. That's certainly part of it. And I would encourage everyone to, when you're looking at projects like that, is to look at how they're planting, what they're planting. Are they considering the types of trees that would grow in that area? Are they working with the community and using local knowledge? And I think those are really important questions. One of the things that I learned, because we think about trees, for example, as just trees, but trees have a DNA sequence, and trees that grow in one space. So take an oak that grows in one space, and say London, and then take an oak that grows up here in the Highlands. They have different DNA sequences, even in different parts of the Highlands, even in different parts of London. And they'll have different DNA sequences. So you want to be mindful of that, and ask these organizations, hey, how do you select the trees? Where do you buy them from? Where do you find the seed stock? Are they genetically compatible with what would be locally in that area? And how do you work with communities? Do you find out about local knowledge and so forth? Because one of the things to be careful about is planting trees where trees shouldn't be. For example, one of the things I mentioned earlier was bog restoration. And a bog is a very sort of wet, marshy kind of area, if you will, with a layer of peat, which is vegetable matter that has rotted away over 1,000 years or whatever. And but trees were planted there on our site, for example, and and you don't want that there because bogs need to be wet and they need to exist in the way they are. So you don't want to plant trees everywhere. So being conscious and mindful of where to plant trees is also important. So yes, tree planting absolutely important, and it's also important that we ask the questions of these organizations to let them know that we're actually interested in the whole process. So it doesn't become just something that you throw money at and then they do whatever. And it just raises everyone to do a better job. And these organizations, many of them already are doing these things, but they might think, oh, our people, our donors aren't interested in finding out about these things. But then you would be if you ask these questions, and then they would be able to say, oh yeah, we totally do that, and then they can put it on their website, and so that creates a fuller picture of what's going on.
That's
a little bit extra there.
Yeah, that's things
than what your question was.
Yeah, those are things I never think about, where traditionally before speaking with you, it was just donate money, they plant trees, it's better for the environment, and that's a great level of detail to go into. So when you look at the bigger picture perspective, so what problems does your industry face? Are there governmental regulations that get in the way? Is it a matter of funding, a matter of awareness, interests? What needs to be in place to really have this take off worldwide?
All of those things. Just like any other project, you're always going to have regulations that you need to look at or find out about. Funding, that's with everything, that's always a question. But I'll go back to the funding as well, and I'll tell you about an organization that inspired us and how we got inspired to do it. And so yes, you have, in different countries, there'll be different regulators. There'll be regulators for forests. Like here we have the Forestry Commission, so you have to talk to them when you're cutting trees, and you have to get permission to do that. And you engage in a conversation with them. And the thing is, regulators are very interested in this, and they want to find out what it is that you're doing and so forth. And if they can help, they will. So that's, sometimes we think of regulation as a big scary enemy sort of thing, but it doesn't have to be that way. But you do need to know what your regulatory framework is all about. Absolutely. Funding. We've been very lucky to meet up with our partners now that we're working with, and as I mentioned, there's ACOM and the Lifescape Project and University of Cumbria. Everyone has seen this as such a great opportunity for learning techniques, learning what works and what doesn't. Having an evidence base to provide new solutions, new nature-based solutions to their own clients. And that's what we call our space, the Natural Capital Laboratory at Birchfield. And it's exactly that, a lab, in the sense that whatever we learn, we're going to make available to people to use. So we've been lucky in our partnerships and the people that we work with. But we also know a group called the Trees for Life, and the founder of Trees for Life had actually been planting trees on his own for about 20-30 years before his organization really grew to any level where it was getting funding. So he was planting trees in to restore the Caledonian forest here in Scotland on his own, essentially, and was doing this work out of passion. So yes, funding, but don't be scared of that either. And sometimes if it means just leaving a space by itself without interaction from you, that doesn't take any money. you can just say, okay, I'm going to let this do its thing. Let the space do its thing and just not touch it. And that doesn't require any funding. You just leave it alone. In fact, I would even say if it's your garden, you could cut down your gardening costs by just not cutting the lawn. So there's that. Then, as you mentioned, perception and involvement from outside and the general public. That's absolutely something you've got to look into. And there is a bit there. Rewilding now does get it can get a bit of negative press because it has been misapplied with some bad consequences in some places. And people believe that it excludes, it's meant to exclude people, but it's not that. These are just rewilding projects that didn't really follow good principles. And so we try to overcome that. So it's important to know what sorts of issues you might encounter in your own community. Let me see, what else was there that you mentioned?
Or any problems you're facing right now in your projects that you wish to be overcome?
Yes. So one of the problems that we are having is so there is an area that's fenced in, and it's about 50 acres. It's about half of the site, and it was clear felled before we purchased it. And clear felling means taking down all the trees, and they were then sold as timber, which is a very important industry here in Scotland and in many places. And when that happened, there was a fence that was put in. Long story short, a number of deer remained within the fenced-in site. And you'd think, okay, well, that's fine, right? And yes, it is, but deer are ruminants, and what they feed on is young trees and the little leaves and the little new shoots and so on. So when you have deer pressure, as we do in this particular space, you can't get the natural regeneration that you would need for the space to become, for the trees to grow enough to continue. So we have to figure out how we move the deer out of that space and into the wider countryside. And the wider countryside is just that, it's open. There's lots of other space that they can go. One of the things that we did, we had a drone assisted deer drive last year in the autumn, I think, or early winter, and it was relatively successful. And it was the drone was an infrared drone, and we learned all sorts of things about that, because in an infrared drone, if the deer go to ground, which is what they tend to do, you can't see them anymore. So that's a problem. And so we got some out, but there's still some there. I think there's about 7 remaining, and that's too many. If there were 2 or 3, that might be okay, but 7, it takes a lot of pressure on the trees. So we have to try to get them out. And one of the things when we first started this project, I said absolutely no killing of the deer. I don't want to do that, because we've created this problem for them, whether it's destroying their habitat, or using the environment for our own development and survival. And so, you can't, destroying can be a difficult or hard word. And imported other deer for sporting, quote unquote, and now they're stuck, and so they would end up paying for our problem that we created for them with their life. So I said, well, no, I don't really want to do that. That's not going to work for me. So so we have to try to get them out. And and now we're going to try a number of different things. Hopefully we can find some innovative solution. We're going to have another deer drive, hopefully in maybe the autumn again or the winter again, depending all on COVID, because you need quite a number of people to be able to walk along and move them to this one spot where we have a deer ramp, and on the ramp they can go up the ramp and out, and then not be able to get back in. So we're going to try a number of different things. So stay tuned what we find out and what we can do. It's going to be interesting.
Sounds like it keeps you busy. Sure. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Because every time you're there, you go and you're like, oh, look, how many do you see now? And they're perfectly happy. They're in their little space and they're perfectly happy. But deer get a bad name when you have when you have an environment that's so dislocated. It's not just one animal that creates the problems. I mean, you have deer, you have sheep, you have little rodents that like bunny rabbits and mice and voles and so forth that eat at the base of trees when there aren't enough birds of prey to control the numbers. I mean, so when you have an environment that's had these dislocations and you have more of one and less of another, all sorts of other problems come into existence. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things that I always like to include when I talk about our problems with deer, and that it's not that deer are evil or that they are bad.
Absolutely not.
Way. Yeah. It's just one part of the problem. So because these problems are so complex and they're so multifaceted.
Definitely. Switching gears for a second, going back to the original topic of the interview is reversing environmental destruction. So this might be outside of the realm what you talked about so far, but in general, we see a lot of the news about environments being destroyed, pollution in rivers, oceans, forests, etc. Do you see a significant amount of this stuff that's happening being able to be reversed, or some of that stuff, do you see it being permanent from the most of your experience?
It's hard to say. And I think focusing for us who are just mere mortals and not scientists and not biologists and so on, what we need to focus on is what can I do, what can we do, and let's see what can happen. Because if we focus on the negative, where is that going to get us? Things can change. Can we change them for the better? Can they return to some idyllic past? I have no idea. Idyllic pasts have never existed as far as my experience. But we can do something. So I don't like to focus on what cannot be, but what can I do?
I love that approach.
Yeah.
Because it's something you have control over, something you could do.
Exactly. I don't have control over much. I'm just this one person. We're just a small group of people who are trying to do something, and that's all we can do. Because I don't want to focus on the oh well, everything is destroyed, nothing is going to come back. That's just a nihilist attitude. That well, how do you move on day to day after that? What do you do? Where do you take that?
Absolutely. Great way of looking at it. So focus on the positive, what you can do. So going back to something you said before really stood out, where you said, like, even at your home, if you have your own garden, just let the grass grow. And I know growing up in America, just kind of the fresh cut lawn, everything like that, if everything's overgrown, there's like the stigma attached to it. So the question I had for you is, like, say, what are the benefits of letting your garden grow? Like, what's the benefit for that? Why do people do that?
Well, there are loads of benefits. And you're absolutely right. I grew up in the US as well. So you absolutely have to have your lawn mowed, everything. And you have to have a lawn. Even that, you just have to have grass. I mean, think about a natural landscape. Where do you see grass just like that? I mean, it just doesn't really happen in nature. I mean, yes, you have glades and that look a certain way, but you'll see even there are different types of grasses, but we plant one type of grass that all looks uniform and things like that. So when you don't cut grass, you get insects back and you get birds back. And if you can, and you add a bit of water, maybe a little pond or a shallow pool that can be used by amphibians, you might get amphibians back. And all those are really great things. How do you overcome our belief system that having a well-manicured lawn is the thing to have? That takes time, but I believe that's changing very much so. I have seen a number of programs saying no mow May, for example, and just even asking people to delay mowing their lawns so that when the wildflowers, and people say, oh, those are weeds, but they're flowers, and the flowers provide food for pollinators and a variety of other insects, especially after the winter, because they'll be, if you have like dandelions and so forth, they'll be the first flowers that you see in the spring. So they provide sustenance for insects. Insects are extremely important. Without them, it's not a good thing. So if you can provide those spaces, even in an urban environment, you'll see much more wildlife coming back to your garden. I even watched, there was an interesting program the other day of a garden in Glasgow that in the middle of Glasgow that had let sort of nature come back, and they stopped mowing the lawn and so forth. And these very endangered water voles started living in their garden and underneath their decks and so forth. And that's a really good thing because we want to coexist with other animals on this planet, and we want to coexist with other plants on this planet. That will benefit each of us, each of them, and ultimately all of us. Because it's not like, oh, well, someone else can do it. I mean, we all live here, all of us. So one of the things, the whatever happens to the quote least of us happens to all of us ultimately, and that's something that we really need to remember. So we're not. Yes, we are individuals, but we're in this together. We're on this boat together. So if we can do a little bit, and even because I totally get it. People are uncomfortable having certain insects around. I totally get it. I had a ginormous spider in the bathroom last night, and I freaked out. And I just left, so I totally understand. But maybe if we can create these spaces, it'll even create a little bit of space for us to get comfortable with that discomfort, or maybe say, oh, well, you know what, maybe I'm not so uncomfortable with this. And maybe just changes the perception a bit, and the perspective.
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, a lot of people, they're scared of spiders, insects, things like that. But the example is deer again. I used to live in Boulder, Colorado, which are right up against the Rocky Mountains. And the deer, they come out and you can see them like from people's homes and stuff. And just being that close to nature, it's a different perspective. And of course, people are into environmentalism, or us vegans, we think we're more open to it. And I guess because we're educated for it. So yeah. Definitely. So the other thing you talked about is you co-authored the book. So I guess before we wrap things up, do you want to talk a little bit about what your book is, where you can get it, what you talk about in it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is called Think Like a Vegan, What Everyone Can Learn from Vegan Ethics. It's available anywhere you buy books, or just go to the website thinklikeavegan.com and we'll direct you to places. It's very briefly, the book is a tool for vegans and non-vegans to learn how to express veganism in in an authentic and very clear sort of way. We go back to the basics of it. We look at the ethics, the very basic ethics at the core of veganism, and then what that looks like in everyday practice. So we have a variety of essays that discuss different aspects of life and how those work with veganism. And then there's a section on sort of practical thought experiments and situations that we all face or that we have heard. And they're all real situations, all names changed, but they're actual things that I've witnessed or people have asked us or that we've overheard and that sort of thing. And we provide a way for people to think about these things and then internalize them so that when they are talking about veganism or when they are trying to understand what vegans are on about, even if they're not vegan or they have no intention of going vegan, at least they will come to it, they will come to an understanding of what the basic core principles are, which is fairness, basically, a basic principle of fairness. So that's the book.
Great, that's amazing. So the last one, but just one more thing that came to mind was, I guess, what's your inspiration and why did you get into rewilding? I have trouble pronouncing the word. Why did you get into rewilding in the first place? What's your motivation?
The motivation, it was a series of things. We in our garden here in Scotland, we were planting native species. So we were starting to think in that way. Then we met with the Trees for Life people, and that really set us off. And in looking for a piece of land where we might be able to do something like that, or to start thinking about whether that would be even possible. And it took us 5 years to find the land and to really start believing that it would be possible to do something like this. So it was, I guess it came from a place that was already within us of loving to see spaces with native species in them, and then meeting the right people that gave us that sparked that innate interest to take the next step.
That's great. Any final words you want to have for anyone watching this?
Oh, gosh. Go for it, do it, read, talk to people, and just focus on what you can do. Absolutely.
Definitely. And any links or everything we'll put in the description of the YouTube video if there's one specific website or something that you want to tell people to go to.
Yeah, we can go to our Birchfield social media. We have Birchfield Rewilding on Instagram and Facebook, and we're working on the website birchfieldhighlands.org and lifescapeproject.org. But we'll put all those in the description, as you say, and thank you for that.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. This was great. It was really good. Thank you so much.